Hello, hello. It's all happening, isn't it? The mermaid scandal is breaking. Every day there's new stuff coming in. Um, and one thing that's kind of, I wanted to highlight is the citizen journalists who have been doing such a great job. I started writing about my guest today, Trish. And this is what I said. I said, StillTish is one of the quiet heroes of this movement. She's a one-woman Spotlight team, the only difference being that Spotlight have not yet worked up the courage to cover this particular sacred class. Any journalist waking up to the scandal, as I think I'll call it from now on, should have her on speed dial. Spotlight were, of course, the people who broke the Boston Catholic Church scandal. And we have our own version over here, although they work for free. They work in their spare time, and they do the jobs that journalists should be doing. So on that point, let me bring in Tish. Hi, Tish. How's it going?
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
No, you're entirely welcome, and well done again for your part in exposing this latest scandal. We've now got this guy who's been posting pornographic photos of himself and dressing up in tiny skirts on social media. It's the interesting thing about this scandal is that it's partly composed of people looking the other way. What made you get into this? What made you decide not to look the other way and really examine this stuff and post the considerable amounts of receipts that you have?
To keep me sane, because as you know, my son is trans-identified. He's actually a gay male, literally a fan of Judy Garland. That was one of the last films we went to see together. I know that's a cliche. And he's now being medicalised, aided and abetted by the NHS. I still don't know where his prescription comes from. But as soon as he came out to me as trans, he'd previously identified as gay, which I totally expected for reasons that are obvious to a lot of mums of gay boys. And then I started to look into the trans thing, not initially hugely alarmed, but very shortly I was. And then in order to keep me sane, and because I'm a long-time feminist and I could see the damage this was doing to women, my nickname used to be Tenacious Tish in the days that I worked.
Right.
I'm like a dog with a bone.
Yes,
and I could not turn my face away from the harms, not just for my son, but for the many young women who are now outnumber our boys. They're 75% as opposed to the 25% of boys.
Yeah. Yesterday I shared a shocking video of a 21-year-old girl who now has male pattern baldness and feels she can't detransition because she's gone too far, and these extremely powerful drugs have already wreaked havoc on her body. I mean, I don't know how much you can talk about your personal story, but is all that still, I mean, when you say he's taking prescriptions, are you having any effect on him in pulling back on that or anything like that?
I'm very lucky in that he still lives at home and we're still quite close. We've sort of got a rule that I won't talk about it with him, except I'm allowed to send any medical information about the harms of the drugs that he's on. And I also reserve the right to tell him about detransitioned gay boys.
Right.
So in fact, I've just told him that I'm about to do an interview, so can he stay upstairs? And I have, in that same message, I've said, are you going to look at some of the detransitioned stories?
Yeah.
And then just said, love you.
Yeah. It's tough.
He's quite nuanced. He doesn't use female spaces. I mean, he actually has really got into this. I think, even though many women might be annoyed at me for saying this, I recognise that identifying into the female sex class harms women. It does great damage. But lots of these boys are not motivated by... They're motivated by a bizarre form of empathy. with women.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's got distorted, and obviously there are AGP males in the mix, and there are many people who are misogynists who were involved in this, but there are many vulnerable young boys. Even to be fair, the ones that have come via the porn route, which is so difficult for families. My son's obviously come from the gay route, so that's a lot easier to deal with personally. But the mums whose sons have got into it via porn, they're the ones that are really isolated, because it's such a difficult thing to talk about. And obviously women are very angry at those boys. I'm very angry at my son, and I understand that completely.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I'm really glad you said that as well, because like I don't think anyone can accuse you of not doing everything you could to help bring this movement to an end. But I think that's a very important point. I've heard this from a lot of people and detransitioners, that some young men who identify as women are simply doing so because they can't bear what men do to women, and they feel that they need to take an escape hatch out of that. It sounds like that's what you're talking about to some extent.
I mean, obviously, you've got to bear in mind that I'm his mum.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And so you can't, I mean, I do say that on my blog a lot. Bear in mind that I'm probably predisposed to have more empathy than I expect other women to have when they're not in my situation. And I completely understand that. So I will make more of an effort to understand that. And I may go too far, and I may be too sympathetic at times. And I think people should be allowed to call me out on that. I can only speak, obviously I'm very close to my son. He lives at home, and I know him very well.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think that, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get back to appreciating nuance and appreciating that there's good and bad people mixed up in this. And the problem is we sometimes can't see who is who. But let me go from your let me widen it out to the recent revelations about mermaids, because that's kind of why I originally wanted to speak to you. As I say, I think one of your latest, you discovering the pornographic artwork by Darren Muse, or by someone associated with Darren Muse. Darren Muse
someone sent it to me, to be fair, just to acknowledge the many contributions that I get, some from women who can't speak publicly, and so it is a collective effort. I think that's really important to say that, because everybody hates the idea of someone taking credit for their work.
Yeah. It's hard though, isn't it? Because it's so dangerous to share this stuff. It's like, as I said recently on my video, PayPal can demonetize, Twitter can silence you, and it's all for the benefit of this kind of weird movement that is, endangering people like your son and empowering some very bad actors. So again, that's a good link. So let's let's get on to mermaids. Part of the insanity around this movement is that a lot of the evidence that condemns mermaids has been freely available for years. We saw the confusing, I have no idea what's going on in them, the pictures of the young kids in kind of lolly type women's clothes. Lolly is a Japanese kind of underage porn thing. But this was on the Mermaid's website in full view, and it's like, it's only when people pick it up and say, hang on a second, this is wrong, that people start realizing, oh yeah, it is. And I think the best example of that is Susie Green's TED Talk, which I always talk about, and I always find fascinating.
And there's many parents, I've done lots of episodes on parents of trans-identified males, as in who are clearly worried that their son was going to turn out gay. And they're very open about it. She does it in that TED Talk. The other woman, Kai Shepley, I did a whole thing on marketing the transgender child, because there's no child is born in the wrong body. No child. There are adult males who retcon their narratives to desexualize their motives. So they say, oh, I knew at 3. What they really mean is, I got into it through porn, and now I don't want to admit that, so I'm going to say that I always knew. And autogynephiles lie. Even I did a series on Anne Lawrence, who is an autogynephilic man, and Anne Lawrence talks about that, Dr. Anne Lawrence, and he's quite open. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think Dr. Anne Lawrence has a care for women and the impact on us at all, but they are a remarkable researcher, and they are quite admit how many men lie.
Yes, yes.
And so part of the compulsion is the lying, because the whole thing is so shaming. And often it's come from being found maybe taking your sister's underwear or your mum's underwear and then getting caught. It's deeply shaming. So there is a huge amount of denial.
Yeah. I mean, you know, of course, there's a huge amount of benefits as well to claiming you're part of a civil rights movement instead of, you know, what it really appears to be, which is the effects of freely available pornography 24 hours a day. You know what I mean? I mean, 24 hours a day puts a kind of time limit on it. It's got no limits. And it seems to me that what we're seeing now is the invisible effect of the internet on all of us. And we're very much the boiling frogs, aren't we?
Well, it's just been a disastrous experiment, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And then if you throw in the fact that there's a huge amount of money to be made from making our children lifelong medical patients.
Yeah.
And you look at, I mean, I try and cover all aspects of that on my blog. I think there's about nearly 300 pieces on there now. So looking at the huge charitable foundations pouring money into this, the politicians that have taken money, I mean, the Liberal Democrats have taken 1.4 million from the makers of Triptoleran, which is for puberty blockers, Ferring Pharmaceuticals. Dawn Butler, she's taken thousands from a man who is part of GLAD, which is
Watson.
You know, Anthony Watson. And so there's a huge kind of money involved in this, and politicians who don't seem to be on top of their brief.
Yeah,
they just seem to have got into the habit of chanting mantras.
Yeah, well,
and I speak as a woman on the left, and you know, and I watched this unfold in, you know, I was aware of the misogyny of men in the left, but I had no idea the extent of it.
Well, someone said that the phrase "trans women are women" is the left's equivalent to "bros before hoes," which I think is very true. So why do you think journalists? I mean, obviously, there's been some great journalism. Joe Bartosh, the Telegraph, the writers who've been covering it for the Times, the Tavistock story for years now. Lucy Bannerman. You know, there's a long list of journalists who behaved admirably, but there's also like newspapers like The Guardian, which have either, you know, crick their necks looking the other way, or when they because of
well, there's two reasons for The Guardian. I've done a series on The Guardian Media Group. There's first time I had a look, I realised that one of the trustees of the Scott Trust, which oversees The Guardian, is responsible for adjudicating in case of any disagreements editorially and can sack the editor. One of the men who was on that was also a trustee of the Paul Hamlin Foundation. Paul Hamlin Foundation has given money to mermaids, gendered intelligence, loads of these groups. Now, I don't know whether he's still the trustee, but he was when I did that piece. And the second piece, they got some money from, I can't remember what it was now, but it was another foundation. They took some money from another foundation that's pushing this. But, and I think I might owe that information to Julian Vigo of Savage Minds.
Yes, she's very good. She's a very smart researcher, like yourself. And so, like, but it does seem to be kind of more than that. Like, if you look at the BBC is paid for by the taxpayer, but it's still pushing this stuff really hard. It doesn't seem to need, you know, some kind of money bags figure.
I think that's only part of it. I think some of it will be like, for example, we can't get the Children's Commissioner to intervene, and it turns out that their social media person has got a daughter who he now calls a trans son. So
Right.
I think that behind some of this are people whose children are caught up in it. And the other thing is queer theory. Younger journalists coming through universities have totally been indoctrinated, and they think it's the new social justice, and they seem to confuse journalism for activism.
Oh yeah, there's a very good example of that in my local newspaper. Published a story about women putting razor blades under stickers.
Which we know is an urban myth.
It's an urban myth, and also if you met the women they're talking about, you'd never stop laughing. These are just kind of like, the gentlest, loveliest people who are just terrified at the the safeguarding failures they're seeing, and the erosion of their rights and their language.
It's bonkers, because I can't remember which trans activist was now, but they openly called for, we're all basically middle-aged women.
Yeah.
We're not exactly out there shouting Allahu Akbar.
I know. The attempt to call it terrorism is very interesting. It's also interesting the way, I don't want to get into it, but we should point out a little side thing. I think today's big news is that the Biden administration has said that trans women can be drafted into the army, but trans men can't. So you can have women's sports, you can have women's prizes, you can take their places on podiums, and you know what I mean. But when it comes to something important, then
which just goes to show that the needs of women and girls, or
Exactly.
our young gay boys and young lesbians, are not important to the Biden administration. Shocking.
Yeah, exactly. But I still feel we almost haven't touched the surface with what's going on at Mermaids. What is your feeling on this? Do you think they can come back from this?
Oh, in another age, I would have said no way. But I'm so used to sort of thinking we're over the hill and we're reaching the summit, and then you find that people still won't call it out. The worry for me is there are so many people who stake their reputations on it. I think we talked about the sunk cost fallacy.
Yes.
But there are so many now that I mean, they tried to stop the Jimmy Savile documentary, did they not? At the BBC.
Yeah. Yes, of course. And it did, and it's got so many I always think that this has got so many, like the BBC, rather than covering this story, are now again a part of it. Just like with Savile.
They're mired in it. And if you think, I mean, one of the other things you were talking about, the anime type porn.
Yeah, anime. Yeah.
Anime. Well, I did a series on Childline, and I did it specifically on Childline because I know that's where my son got it from. Because he used to show me these social media influencers, and when I started to look into them, they'd all been used by Childline. Childline, they've deleted it now, and I don't know whether it's because of my blog or not, but they used to have it was called What the Fuck Porn, and it was introducing the idea of porn. Bear in mind, this is aimed at under 18-year-olds. Childline is run by the NSPCC, which is the only children's charity in the UK that has statutory powers and can take children away from their parents. And they run Childline. They run Childline, and in that porn one, they included references to things like hentai. If you try and import hentai into Australia, it is confiscated by the Australian Border Police.
Yeah. No,
so the NSPCC, in fact, Kelly J. Keane mentioned the NSPCC in a recent interview with Julia Hartley-Brewer, and I was cheering because nobody seems to want to touch at the NSPCC.
Yeah, well, the NSPCC, they were one of the people to block me on Twitter when I was complaining about their employee who I think hired Monroe Bergdorf as a inspirational speaker.
All the charity sector as well, the people just move around, because I didn't understand why the Samaritans weren't talking about the suicide, the fake suicide figures that are used all the time, which I've debunked on my blog. And then I realised that the woman who is the CEO of the Samaritans came via Girl Guides And while at Gale Guides, they made it mixed sex.
Yes, famously,
But
yeah.
further to that as well, Beaumont Society, which was set up by cross-dressing men who now call themselves trans, but were just transvestites.
Sure.
They set up an organisation called the Beaumont Trust as like a sister organisation, or a brother organisation, I probably should say.
Yeah.
And right at the very inception of that, going back over 25 years, the Samaritans were involved. And if you've also, you might have seen some ex-Samaritans volunteers explaining that they get a lot of calls from men who are clearly talking about being women, and they're clearly just masturbating while they're talking to them.
Yeah, I've heard that from many phone line workers who said that they would often get that, men saying they identified as women in order to keep people on the line and masturbate. It really is shocking. Like, you know, that's what, like, Nicola Sturgeon's claim that no man would ever do anything like this to get close to a woman.
The British Association for Gender Identity Professionals, who is all the people who work in this field, they put a submission into Maria Miller's Transgender Equality Inquiry to the Women and Equalities Committee. And they said it would be naive to think that men would not take advantage of this. And they said, we can put you in touch with prison officers and governors of prisons who are concerned about this. And also we know that Rona Hotchkiss has spoken about this, ex-prison governor.
Yeah, well, again, it seems to be just, you know, even though people speak out about it, the big problem I think we have, and will continue to have until we can kind of, you know, make it a safe thing to talk about, are people looking the other way, you know? Like when the history of this is written, I think women like yourself and the women on Mumsnet and you know, people like Jennifer Billick and all these people will be, you know, venerated as heroes. You know,
well, it was middle-aged women who were trying to alert people to Jimmy Savile.
Yeah.
And now what have we got? We've got Jemima Saviles running all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, what Nicola Sturgeon seems to be deliberately ignoring, because I can't believe anyone would be so stupid as to actually not realize this, is that, like, if you take the Catholic Church, for example, these men studied, you know, they passed as priests, they worked their whole lives to be taken, to be trusted as members of a community. And then they've used that trust freely for a number of years with the protection of the church. But the point is, it took a lot of effort to get to that position. It took a lot of work to put themselves in that position. This has no on-ramp. The on-ramp is level. All you have to do, and we've seen it time and time again, is write your pronouns as she, her, and you get allowed into lesbian apps.
Well, I've said before, we have created a new priest class. It's not that all priests were paedophiles, it's that paedophiles colonized and I say that as I'm a lapsed Catholic atheist, but my uncle, who died a couple of years ago, was a Catholic priest. Broke his heart.
No, absolutely, and it wreaked havoc on you know, the faith. Even my dad's faith was kind of tested by it. You know, he was as shocked as anyone else, but you know, in the end, he was able to do that adult thing of tracing the truth and finding out where the church was corrupt and where it wasn't, and he still had a belief that there were good people in all these organizations. You know, and I do too. You know, I think once these things become impossible to ignore, good people are going to have to wake up. You know, I got into a conversation with a friend this morning on email. You know, and what they do, I notice, is that they just pretend not to know the issues. They pretend never to have heard of mermaids. They pretend never to have heard of the Tavistock. Every time you speak to them about it, it's like, oh yes, no, send me a link. You know what I mean? And it's like,
it's a studied ignorance, and it's denial.
Yeah. No. And what, but
And
why?
the whole
Why
thing
is it
is
happening?
just built on lies. The whole thing is built on lies. They've done a really good thing. In actual fact, I'm trying to think who it was. I did a series on a guy called Martin Rothblatt, who's now Martin.
Yep.
And he
Martin,
specifically said that he discussed opposition to gay marriage and why the church, Christian evangelicals in the United States, why they made it all about religious, that they wanted marriage to remain a religious institution, and how they narrowed the arguments down to that. And they did it because they said, if it was a civil rights issue, we knew we would lose. But if we narrowed it down to just being about our faith and exclusive marriage for a man and a woman, I mean, I'm for gay marriage, so I'm just saying that was their technique.
Yeah.
That they did not want it to be a civil rights. And if it was civil rights, they thought they'd lose. And that's exactly what's happened now. It's become a civil rights issue. We've got ACLU, we've got Amnesty. Amnesty, who also took money from the Arcus Foundation, who are behind a lot of this. And so there's money is in there, sure. People believe in queer theory. They've been completely indoctrinated. There's an element of cult thinking. And it's also an elite project as well, because in order to differentiate yourself and claim a higher status, there's always these barriers to excluding people who are working class or people who have not had access to that education. This is the perfect thing because you've got a whole language. It's like when the aristocrats spoke Norman French. Now they speak queer theory.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting, isn't it, how Jacob Breslau was able to hide in plain sight using this kind of arcane language of academia.
Yeah, because it's classic Butler, isn't it? It's more obfuscation. It's more obfuscating than illuminating. I've just finished reading his thesis, and I'm about to do a piece on it. And
God bless you for your service.
You know, you've got to really delve in, and but they really try and not say it explicitly.
Yes.
Like queering the child, queering childhood.
Yeah. And then when you kind of question it, they try and portray you as the kind of creepy one.
That you're seeing something that's not there, or that you are the one that's obsessed with child sex.
Yes.
I mean, there is an inversion of truth. There's a lot of what goes on, but yeah, I mean, it is there. It is there in his work, without a doubt.
Well, you know, it's like you know, I guess part of the appeal to all this is that you can kind of display your perversity in public, and you know, even if you're in a children's charity, you can do it. You know, sorry, hold on one second. Oh, I'm gonna have to. Sorry, I'm gonna have to cut this short.
No, it's fine.
Tish, I've got to speak to this this person. But look, let's get back on again soon and speak again. Sorry, be with you 1 second, and we'll pick this up. But for the moment, thank you so much for everything you've been doing, Tish, and keep it up.
No problem. Bye.
Speak to you soon. Bye bye. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. And I hope that was a good chat. I didn't really plan anything, so it was a bit all over the place, but we'll definitely have Tish on again. All right. Thank you. Bye bye.